Good afternoon and good evening. My name is Kyung-hee Song. I am the Director General of Artificial Intelligence Policy Bureau at the Ministry of Science and ICT. First of all, I'd like to offer my congratulations on the hosting of the Global Innovative Growth Forum, GIGF. My sincere gratitude also goes out to our host, the Ministry of Economy and Finance and the World Bank. I'd also like to thank our moderator and panelists, Ms. Malalovici Birafian from the World Bank, Deputy Minister Khaled Arata of the Communications and Information Technology of Egypt, Ms. Jane Treadwell, Government Transformation Lead the Amazon Web Services, Mr. Mark Williams, the Practice Manager of the World Bank, and Professor Park Kyung-yeol, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. Marking its 30th anniversary this year, the GIGF seems to more significant than ever. Digital transformation triggered by both COVID-19 and the first industrial revolution is accelerating in all sectors. Countries around the world are striving for digital transformation and data use to end the pandemic and make economic recovery from it. Korea has also used this outstanding digital infrastructure to fight the pandemic and developed the best practice of digital transformation through public and private cooperation. A prime example of such cooperation is the face mask applications developed last year with the data released by the government and creative ideas of private developers to provide the public with real-time information on mask availability on the beginning of COVID-19. Other examples of digital transformation can be found in many areas. Thanks to private cloud services, Korea's online vaccination booking system is running smoothly despite the traffic, and online classes are offered throughout all school levels. Data is a critical resource in the age of digital transformation. It can decide the performance of artificial intelligence and create innovative digital technologies and services. Last year, Korea announced the Digital New Deal initiative to prepare for economic recovery and digital transformation, and launched one of the key pillars, the Data Project. The Data Dam project is aimed at collecting, standardizing, and processing data produced in public and private sectors to use them to improve AI technologies. The ultimate goal of this project is to innovate existing industries, create new industries, services, and add quality jobs. In particular, as of now, 191 types of AI dataset and 5.3 trillion pieces of data from areas such as voice recognition and self-driving videos and medical images have been collected and publicly released through the OpenAI Dataset project as one of the Data Dam projects. As of now, about 70,000 data labelers recruited through the online crowdsourcing platform participated in that data collection process. And a total of 1,300 types of AI dataset will be developed by 2025. The Data Dam project has produced many examples of applying data and AI solutions to diverse areas, such as environmental protection, health, and public services. Moreover, Korea provided legal grounds for data generation and data use and improved related governance systems by enacting the Data Framework Act in October to foster data industry. When the Data Framework Act goes into effect in April next year, a National Data Policy Committee will be created to coordinate the overall data policies of the public and private sectors. The government will also establish an objective evaluation system for data value and quality, and create a standard contract agreement template for data exchange to build people's trust in data exchange and data use. Establish the infrastructure of the data sharing and data use of and improving related laws and regulations should be focused on how to balance data use and data protection, while fostering an enabling environment for trustworthy data. It is also necessary to ensure trustworthiness and ethics in the process of AI development. By addressing copyright issues when collecting and analyzing data from the internet for AI training, and creating new principles and systems to facilitate the sharing and exchange of data. I hope today's forum serves as the platform of a constructive discussion on how to use and practice data with the common goal of innovative-driven global growth. The Korean government will spare no effort to share its experience and knowledge to promote this goal. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Song. She has signified the importance of AI data and solution and the government's responsibility, such as the legal support and legal framework. And now, let's move on to our session 2 on shaping the future of data economy. For session 2, again, we have 2 keynote speakers, exciting keynote speeches from our distinguished speakers. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker for session 2, Mr. Lee Kwang-hyun, the president of the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. Please join me in welcoming President Lee in the virtual studio.
Hello everyone. I'm pleased and honored to join this session titled Shaping the Future of Data Economy at the GIGF 2021. I will now deliver my presentation on the future of data economy. People often attempt to predict the future. We predict what will happen a few minutes, days, months, and/or years later. In everyday life, we predict tomorrow's weather, next week's winning lottery numbers, when the COVID-19 situation will end, and who will the next president will be. It is human nature to make predictions amid so many uncertainties. Depending on the issue, the accuracy of predictions may determine the fate of an individual and nation and its people. Humanity has made various efforts to better predict and prepare the future. We can say that all our academic activities are a part of the process of making predictions about the future. There's an old saying, review the old and learn the new. We have gained wisdom for the future through historical research. Common database-based techniques used to predict future events include the least square method, clustering, pattern recognition, cognitive psychology, brain science, text mining, and big data analysis. Data-based future predictions are experiencing a paradigm shift with the exponential increase in data. Worldwide data will grow to 175 zettabyte by 2025 and reach a whopping 2,142 zettabyte in 2035. To give you a better idea, a stack of DVDs containing 175 zettabyte worth of data would equal to the distance of traveling to the moon and back 25 times. Recently, consumers have become data producers themselves, following the introduction of cloud computing and the widespread use of smartphones and tablet PCs. Moving forward, we can expect even more data production by companies due to the development of communication and sensor technologies and the increase of IoT devices. The explosive increase in data has opened up new possibilities for future predictions. According to the law of large numbers, the precision of statistical predictions, such as means and variations, improve significantly with the number of observations. We can obtain more reliable predictions about the future by analyzing vast amounts of data. Predictions based on big data can be applied to various fields, from the analysis of human behaviors and consumption patterns to natural phenomena forecasting. These predictions have greater accuracy since big data is comprised of past occurrences and qualitative aspects such as the characteristics of specific groups. Cultural differences can also be taken into account. However, similar to existing method of prediction, the results are less accurate for events in the distant future, and there will always be exceptions. In the age of a data economy, new economic value is created through data-based predictions. Data has now become the staple of future industries, similar to coal and fossil fuels in the days of industrialization. In the future, competition between individuals, businesses, and nations will be decided by how they use data to make predictions. According to data transactions, data protection and data competitiveness must be improved. Individuals, companies, and nations that secure their data and use it to make accurate predictions will emerge as the future leaders. The Korean government will be investing 33.5 trillion won from 2020 to 2025 in the Digital New Deal. A data dam will be established to maximize the use of data upon which the digital economy is built. Data will be collected from public and private sources via 5G and other high-speed networks and standardized into training dataset for AI. The data dam will enhance AI performance and deliver innovative services through the integration of AI and data for various fields such as education, medical services, and national defense. To ensure the successful building of a data dam, the government is making strategic investment in 7 sub-projects spanning the area of data, AI, and cloud services. In addition to creating new jobs and stimulating the economy, such as efforts will enhance overall industrial competitiveness and drive innovation across industries. The growth of the data economy will continue to accelerate as we are now at the age of technopolitics. Until now, international politics has been largely governed by geopolitics. In the past, geopolitical location was important. However, today, the global economy, driven by science and technology, dominates the international politics. The future global economy will be led by countries with unique scientific and technological achievements, advanced data and data-based prediction techniques and strategies. I would like to stress the importance of global political economy, especially in the context of technopolitics and as a future strategy for the data economy. In international politics, there are open cards and hidden cards. In the age of technopolitics, the hidden cards are the one related to advanced technology and data. By conducting data analysis, we can make predictions and devise strategies for global dynamics in politics and economies. This applies to domestic and international economic index predictions, market volatility, and supply chain management. In addition, data-driven management is crucial for strategic national technologies, as is supply chain management for strategic national industries. When we comprehend the new dynamics of international relations based on big data analysis and use it to predict the future, we will be a leading country in the age of a digital economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Lee, for your insight. He started with the genuine human desire to predict the future and how the data can predict the future and drive the global economy. And the second keynote speech will be delivered by Professor Alex Pentland, founder and director of the MIT Connection Science. And please welcome Professor Alex Pentland.
Means of production. You shouldn't think of data as something that is just extra or put off. Data is equivalent in importance to money, capital, or labor, or land. And that really changes the way we think about it because it's so central to the world, even today, but increasingly going forward. For instance, President Xi of China said, "He who has the data has the initiative." Sounds very much like the old saying, if he who has the money makes the rules. But it's true. Data is incredibly important and becoming much more so. The problem with data, just like the problem with capital, is that it's in too few hands. Today, only a few large companies have access to a large amount of data, diverse data. And even governments which have lots of data have the data siloed and broken up in a way where it's unusable. So the problem, of course, from the citizen point of view, is that they feel like they're left out of this game. They're being exploited, they're being pushed around, and they feel powerless. And this is a very unstable situation. So this is like, for instance, the way citizens felt in the mid-1800s when Karl Marx wrote about capital. And the cure, of course, is to be able to get that sort of power of data in the hands of many people doing many things, industry, private citizens, local government, etc. And the good news, actually, is that existing laws, like the EU's GDPR, in the US, the California privacy law, and all the other laws in different countries that are patterned after those two sort of large data-intensive areas, allow for something called a fiduciary, which is you don't have to control data that you put off or data use by yourself. You can have somebody that represents you, a third party. And in money, this is familiar like a bank. A bank doesn't own your data, but it represents you to make safe investments. In labor, it's a labor union or some other institution like that that represents you. It doesn't own your labor, it represents you. And the same thing is beginning to happen with data. We're seeing data cooperatives, data trusts, data unions, which allow people to deal with the fact that it's too complicated to be able to really understand how to use data. And an individual person has very little bargaining power. But by forming institutions like data banks, data trusts, citizens can know what's happening to them, and they can have negotiating power to set up a true data market. So that's the good news. And what's also along with that is progress in AI has changed rather dramatically in just the last couple of years because of the need for privacy, because of the need to have data at the edge and not just in the center. And a whole new field called federated AI, federated learning has sprung up, which allows you to do all of the magic of data, but without owning the data. So what happens is these are AI techniques that allow you to trade statistics or insights rather than the data itself, so that you don't ever give up ownership of the data. What you do is you provide people with answers in order to get services in return. And this is a real transformation. It's also not terribly intuitive for people today. We think of having data as being something we have to have in a lake or a pool, but that's a terrible thing to do because it's dangerous and it leaves the citizens and small actors out. Instead, we can now, with these new techniques, leave the data where it is and set up networks of query and answer that have the same power as the best AI. For instance, we recently helped the major American banks set up a network like this where they no longer trade data, personal data, they trade tokens back and forth that say, yes, it's a good customer, no, he's a bad customer, but they don't share data. This is Akoya.com if you're interested. And Google, who has billions of phones through Android, has recently moved many of the phone operations off of a centralized system and into an edge. So things like your typing, things like your search history, today don't leave your phone. All that is left is, all that goes back to Google is anonymous, non-identifying statistics, which let them monitor how the system as a whole is going and improve it. It's a real transformation in this data ownership argument. So the two things together, the idea of being able to have data banks, data trusts, to be able to empower citizens and smaller actors to have use of their data, together with the federated AI and federated machine learning, which makes it possible to get the magic of data without giving up ownership of the data really opens up the potential for a world where data can be as liquid as money, but without threats of privacy, proprietary secrets being revealed, or state secrets. So it's a very different way of thinking. And what we see now is that certain countries, and particularly trading countries, are realizing this potential by setting up national data trading platforms. So for instance, China has one that utilizes 5G and IoT, but also AI and blockchain to be able to trade data within and between cities and also for beginning to manage trade. Singapore has set up a similar one. It's sort of a competitor. It's called Project Ubin. And it was their sovereign wealth fund that set up this new trading platform with investment from big banks like JP Morgan. And we helped Switzerland set up something called the Swiss Trust Chain, which is, again, it's a data sharing platform that is secure, privacy preserving, and allows much more liquid trading of data. And currently we're working with Australia, Guyana, other countries to be able to add to these data platforms, to be able to have a systematic fabric of data while not threatening individual privacy or companies' proprietary secrets. So I see a real transformation happening, one that's much like the advent of the internet, but now it's a new layer on top of the internet, which is for handling data in a safe way, which doesn't take the data away from the citizens or the small companies, but enables insights to be traded freely for the greater good of the entire society. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pentland, for the passionate speech. We could learn much about the correlations between the data, AI, and what each country is responding to those relationships, and hopefully we can learn more throughout the forum. And now we're going to move on to our panel discussion. The panel discussion will be moderated by Ms. Millar Veerapan, the Program Manager and Data Scientist, Development Data Group at World Bank. So please welcome Ms. Millar Veerapan to the virtual stage.
Good afternoon and good evening. First, a very warm welcome to everyone who took time to be here today. And special thanks to our esteemed speakers who will bring very diverse perspective to today's discussion. And also thank you to the GIGF team and Ministry of Economy and Finance and the support of Ministry of Science and ICT for hosting this excellent session. I'm Malavari Veerapan, again, the report manager for the World Development Report 2021, Data for Better Lives, and I'll be the moderator for this segment. Data are growing at an unprecedented rate and are becoming an integral part of the daily lives of most people everywhere. It's really clear from some of the keynote speakers, very inspiring, that much of this recent explosion in new data has stemmed from the digitization of firm operations, and how combining these data with traditional sources such as censuses, national surveys, government administrative data, and data produced by civil society organizations could help fill data gaps, provide timelier and finer scale assessments of programs and policies, and serve public policy needs. In the World Development Report, we discuss how the innovations resulting from the creative new uses of data could prove to be one of the most life-changing events of this era for everyone. Yet the full economic and social benefits of data remain largely unrealized. Data is a resource that can be reused, repurposed, and combined with other data to create more value. Data that is locked away is a wasted investment. So one important message from the report is that simply gathering more data is not the answer. Significant data shortfalls, particularly in poor countries, do exist. But the aim of this report is to shift the focus toward using more data, using data more effectively to improve development outcomes, particularly for poor people in poor countries. The more data is reused, the higher the risk that will be misused. Some of our earlier speakers spoke about it. And the COVID-19 pandemic provides powerful examples of the tensions posed by data. Countries around the world had moved swiftly to repurpose mobile phone records to monitor the spread of the virus, but at the same time, they've struggled to balance the benefit against privacy concerns and the risk of misuse. The WDR 2021 presents a very aspirational vision for building data systems that unlock the value of data through improved data sharing and reuse, while putting in place safeguards that build trust and protect against harmful misuse of data. But how do we build such data systems that integrate all users and create data flows between government, civil society, individuals, academics, and the private sector to enable more creative use of data? How can we foster digital transformation and create enabling conditions for the private sector to thrive and innovate? How can international organizations help low and middle income countries share, use, and reuse data and address some of the pressing data governance challenges? Today, we are privileged to have with us three esteemed panelists to discuss the opportunities and challenges data presents in today's world. All their extensive bios are provided in the GIGF information booklet. Now, I'm pleased to invite our first speaker, His Excellency Khalid El-Athar, Deputy Minister for Digital Transformation, Automation and Administrative Development, Ministry of Communications and Information Technology, Egypt. So, Your Excellency, your country's Digital Egypt strategy lays out an ambitious vision for transforming Egypt into a digital society. You've made great progress in several line ministries, such as the Ministry of Justice, for example, on digital modernization and improvement of service delivery. So where does data sit in all of this? And how do you see sharing of public sector data, improving data flows within the public sector, including open government data, fit in your efforts to build a strong digital and data economy? Sir, I think you're still muted.
I'm very pleased and very happy to be with you into this discussion and this panel. I think the discussion about data is very critical for government, very critical for citizens and business as well. So the idea of our digital transformation is actually to build the right data sets, right? We, as discussed earlier, the data is in government in particular is siloed. It's structured in a way that makes it raw. And in order to use it, it has to be connected and it has to be somehow in a form that AI and analytics can work on them. So the Digital Egypt strategy is how to build these data sets in a way that is actually usable for the different policymakers and different policy management, right? Trying to come to the evidence-based policies and so on. So the core of the transformation is to how to build the right data sets and to build what we call digital transformation in an enterprise, one enterprise architecture that connects everybody. And I think the platform concept is the real one that we are trying to use. However, what Egypt has done is not only in the Justice Department, but in multiple fields of life or domains of life, like healthcare, companies and commercial entities, how we can serve them best, for government services, and so on and so forth. Our effort in digital transformation is based on platform concepts, where we are trying to connect all the players around healthcare, providers, doctors, monitors, auditors. All this should be including citizens and including also business people, in order really to improve healthcare. Because we believe that private sector is the one that actually steers the economy, and the government should sit in the backstage trying to put the right regulation. And we cannot put the right regulation without data. But data, we are having a legacy of so many applications that were built. And the problem with data analytics and AI is you have to repurpose the data. So what Egypt is trying to do now instead of repurposing the data, why don't we build our systems around the domains of life? Healthcare, just employment, housing, and so on and so forth. And this is shared between the analytics and the transactional platform. And this is a project, we call it Ahmus project, for revamping the entire set of applications built on integration and exchange of data. Then we come, so that the concept of repurposing of data is somehow controlled. On the other hand, in order to expose this data, the concept of federation, so we don't have one data set or one set of data sets that is in one place, in a centralized place. No, it has to be distributed, and the intelligence is in a federated manner. And everybody has the intelligence based on domains. So the idea that Dr. Alex was explaining is very appealing to us, and it is really in use. However, data policies, which is the first part of the session, is extremely critical, because in order to build this data, we moved beyond governance here. We should have the right data policies to make use of the data without exposing the privacy, without being misused. And the misuse could be something, it is not something intentional. It could be that people are unable to analyze. So the human element here and the policymaker view of data is extremely important. And people, they don't come with the background of how to use data and so on. So how we support them in order for them to work with this data and to actually extract the value out of it. All right. The last one is how to expose the data to the private sector and how we can use it. So the idea of tokenization of data and the idea of not giving insights, direct insights, but we are actually connecting the private sector within the platforms so they can use the data, but with a good, I would say, policies to make sure that they are used for their transactions and so on. So we are trying to put within the platforms also the financial services, the telco operators, the private sector into one ecosystem.
Thank you. I mean, that was a very inspiring set of initiatives that you have as part of the agenda that you have for Egypt. Now, I would like to invite our next speaker, Jane Treadwell, Lead Government Transformation in Asia Pacific in Japan from Amazon Web Services. So the question I have for you, Jane, is that, His Excellency spoke about all the important agenda and initiatives that they have for data from the public sector side. But it's clear from the recent pandemic that the private sector has a key role to play in creating value from data. And considering Amazon's global presence, can you tell us about some of the work Amazon is doing to enable creation of value from data while preventing misuse? Especially if you have any examples to share of how this is done in low and middle income countries where data infrastructure and technology requirements are even more challenging.
Right. Sometimes the hardest thing of the day is to work out whether you're muted or not. Look, I really appreciate the chance to address this forum and to congratulate the Government of Korea and World Bank in pulling this all together. Just wanted to firstly say that I've worked for over 30 years in government and then in international development with the World Bank, as it turned out. And only most recently with the government transformation team of Amazon Web Services. So I've actually seen and been part of the process, I suspect, of encouraging people in government to understand the importance of data, to understand that transformation is not just about technology. And so in looking at how we are seeing everyone across every spectrum being impressed and curious and anxious, I suppose, in terms of how data is gathered, used and applied. but we're also seeing it disrupt industries, jobs, people's experiences in both positive and not so positive ways. And the pivoting to virtual and digital life since the pandemic began is now pursuing the sort of a momentum and pushing the sort of ideas of leveraging the strengths of all actors, as Mr. Khalid said just before. This digital ecosystem of actors is absolutely fundamental to the way in which we can accelerate the transformation of economies, societies and communities. Just wanted to also reinforce that Amazon Web Services is not Amazon. It is a significant international business providing on-demand technology services to millions of customers daily. These are the entrepreneurs, the startups, the small and medium-sized businesses, major enterprises, government organisations and communities organisations that have access now to the technologies and the platforms that they might not have been able to purchase or get previously. And so it's our customers who are the ones that create value from the data. They have full control of their data. And just to make sure there's no misunderstanding, AWS prohibits and has systems designed to prevent access by any of its personnel to customer data for any purpose. So the real energy comes from our customers, and they are now accessing computing power, storage, databases, and then these much more sophisticated technologies like data lakes, analytical tools, ML, AI, with confidence, security, and we're helping them gain those skills. So you asked about some examples of what happened at the beginning of the pandemic and how through AWS we supported governments and businesses. And I'd like to actually start with Egypt, which makes sense. So with over 22 million students in 50,000 schools, Egypt, the region's most populous country, and has the largest student community in the region, teamed up with AWS, the Education Ministry, and deployed the Egyptian Knowledge Bank along with an existing e-learning platform. And they were able to scale their system from 2 grades to the entire estate in 4 days. So this opened up opportunities for students. In Jordan, a similar e-learning platform was built in just a week to provide remote education and language classes in Arabic and English to 2 million Jordanian students. We're actually using Zoom. Zoom became, for today's forum, Zoom became absolutely critical and exploded really in terms of the way in which people could interact in all parts of the world. And it had been part of in making use of the AWS infrastructure since 2011. But in order to respond to this demand, it had to scale very quickly. It went from a niche business software popular amongst tech companies to becoming a verb and a noun for many people in the world, where it had moved from an average 10 million daily meeting participants in 2019 to 350 million participants a year later. Getting down to some of the sort of the health aspects around how AWS worked with government in the state of New South Wales, where I am today, it was able to, the health department was able to handle an 18-fold increase in video conferencing. They used our cloud contact centre to manage an influx of calls regarding the testing. They provided SMS results, notification workflow automatically, and over 104 million texted results to citizens, which reduced the wait times from days to hours and saved 750 staff hours by leveraging this scalable and secure solution. And then I just wanted to, you mentioned about the impact on low to medium sized countries. So clearly many of these elements were able to be done in the advanced countries, but it also actually helped create capability and capacity, both in terms of using rapid innovation for the Moderna vaccine, which of course is spread across many countries around the world. Once the vaccine was developed, it became really apparent that the next challenge for the public health system would be about equitable and efficient distribution. And so AWS worked alongside 26 national governments to build up vaccine management systems to help scale and meet the surge for demand. And on that, we had the privilege to work with the government of India to execute the largest vaccine drive in history through their application called CoWIN, a countrywide vaccine registration and scheduling management system, which they are sharing in terms of digital diplomacy with many countries. And when it first opened, 1.9 million people accessed the system. By the end of September this year, more than 850 million vaccine doses have been administered and more than 1 billion people are expected to use that system. So that scale, it is also around knowledge and sharing and platforms. And just one more example, because I'm sure I've run out of time. I think the thing around data and capacity to interrogate and understand it, as an example has been Genomics England was established to deliver 100,000 genome projects, a cohort of cancer and disease whole genomes by the UK Department of Health and Social Care. During the pandemic, GEL launched an initiative to deliver a cohort of 8 leading pharmaceutical companies and research organisations to fuel vaccine treatment and early detection research. And so this research environment, trusted, safe, now hosts 35,000 genomes, went live on AWS in under 3 months and becomes a sort of a model by which a lot of data, data scientists and medicos in this instance can actually gain the benefit of collaborating, connecting with their own private data sets to help increase global collaboration in a secure environment. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I think you really nicely illustrated the importance of data infrastructure and data platforms across sectors, how they are foundational to be able to, improve the accessibility of data in both safe and secure manner. And nicely segues into my question to our next speaker. I'm pleased to invite Mark Williams, Practice Manager, East Asia and Pacific, and Global Knowledge and Expertise, Digital Development Global Practice, World Bank. So Mark, our previous two other panelists spoke about sort of the public sector perspective and the private sector perspective of the kind of initiatives that they're working on to build resilient data systems. And with your extensive experience at the World Bank, what can you tell us about the role that international organizations like the World Bank can play in helping countries meet this ambitious vision of integrated national data systems that's outlined in the World Development Report, especially where data can become central to policy making and improve service delivery?
Thanks, Mala. So I think the first thing is actually the point that you made just at the end of your question there, which relates to the WDR. So I think the first role of organizations like the World Bank and other organizations working in this field is to develop and articulate a vision of how data can be used to improve governance and improve people's lives. I think the research, the policy analysis, and the depth of that, and then turning that into a vision for how data can be used in developing countries, a vision that's relevant for developing countries, I think is an extremely important function of organizations like the World Bank. And the discussion we're having today, I think, is partly a result of the World Development Report and other work around that, and how that's triggered a debate and transferred the debate from advanced countries with advanced technical capabilities to to one in which it's made relevant for developing countries. So I think that's the first thing. And then I think beyond that, when it comes to more practical implementation, I think we can think of this in three areas. The first one is the technical side of this. I mean, the implementing the vision that we've talked about here, and the previous speakers have articulated what's going on in their countries, but that is an extremely complex technical and institutional challenge. And it's a continually moving frontier in which there's no playbook which you can take off the shelf and apply in a developing country. So I think developing that technical expertise, sharing it between governments and between companies, and bringing it to client countries at the World Bank in a way which is usable and implementable in different environments, I think is one essential function of international organizations like the World Bank. The second one is a very important feature of what we're talking about, which is the fact that it touches on multiple institutions within any government, and beyond governments, in fact, across into the private sector and the non-governmental organizations. And that creates specific challenges for any kind of reform, but particularly within the public sector, when you're trying to create data resources and processes which span multiple institutions, particularly in where they've traditionally been treated separately across those different institutions, is an extremely difficult challenge. Now, international organizations like the World Bank have relationships, strong and deep relationships across the whole of government in most cases. We have the technical cooperation, we have financial relationships working with multiple institutions. So that whole of government relationship that the organization brings, I think, is a key facilitator for what we're talking about here, which involves pooling and centralizing resources, data resources across government. So that's the second piece. And then the third piece, of course, is the money. What we're talking about here is extremely expensive and difficult and long-term reforms that are required. What we've been hearing about from governments, particularly the Korean experience, but also beyond that, is the latest stage of 20 or 30 years of evolution on this and efforts, which has been an extremely challenging and large-scale project of reform. And it will continue to be so. So bringing financial resources to support countries in those reforms is an absolutely essential part of this role. Malala.
Thank you, Mark. Really great points. I hope we can dive a little bit deeper into this as we get into a discussion. But I want to pick up on one of the points that you talked about, which is the whole of government approach. It's a nice segue again back to Your Excellency, where you also talked about this federated nature of building the data systems, and where more users and producers are involved, where you're improving access and data flows and sharing. But opinion polls show that across the world, trust in institutions is very low today. And you're working on several data governance efforts, including the recently adopted data protection law. So in developing your country's data systems, how do you balance this desire to make data more widely available with the need to prevent misuse of data and foster trust in the public administrations? Because the end goal is to create this trustworthy data sharing and data use environment. Over to you, Your Excellency.
So basically, let us go to the main issue here, which is the loss of trust. All right. We really need to work on restoring this trust, and you cannot restore this trust while the government does its work the same way that it has been for the past 100 years. All right. So from an organization shape and form, from the culture, and you have to change all this, right? And data and systems are just enablers that we have to put into perspective the people to work with. You cannot change anybody, but you put all I would say, the stimulus for change around him or around her in order to really change, all right? So which means they have to change how they look into data, how they look into systems, how they look into exchange, all right? The idea of, when I joined the public sector 7 years ago, Right? I read a statement in one of the literature. It says that government is the arena of conflict, and I could not, grasp the idea why the government is an arena of conflict. And when I worked for 7 years, I realized that we are actually, the competition is fierce inside government as well as it is between different private sector, right? We compete for resources, we compete for actually achievements, we compete for so many things. So the idea is how to use the data system to be a stimulus for change, and how to make sure that, I call it democratization of data, democratization of analytics. And basically, the people into governments, especially in developing countries, they still believe in the concept of data stewardship is actually a big misconception, let me put it this way. And the ownership of data is a true issue it's one of our challenges, because everybody believes if he creates the data, it's his, or it's her, right? While the data will not make sense unless it is really consistent, it is linked, it is exchanged. Because the theory of innovation, it says if we have an information flow and collaboration, then you have a good innovation system. So that's the cultural and actually the legacy that we deal with into the transformation. And another thing into the transformation, and that's why the word transformation is really a reflection of what's happening. Because people believe that when we put the automation systems and we connect them even together for the whole of a government approach or a connected government approach, then the business is done. Actually, it's just 1 mile along 100 miles trip, or journey, all right? Because we are changing the people, and when we talk about digital life, right? And the pandemic actually helped us in actually articulating what does it mean, a digital life, all right? Because we have the digital divide now has to be redefined. The digital divide is the divide into the concept of analytics and concept of data access, all right? In order, this knowledge has become quote unquote public knowledge. So if you are deprived from this public knowledge, you have a divide. So the idea of reading the data, reading the analytics is the name of the game. However, we have to deal with the concept of, people, they would like to protect their data. They would like to protect their state, all right? So we took some good steps, but we have many steps to go in order to convince people more and more of sharing data, connecting data, being consistent with the rest, building so the idea of a lake, it's actually because we are unable to agree on how the data will look like, how the data is structured. So we come up with lots of legacies, right, from the past maybe 2 decades or 3 decades. And Egypt's view is very simple. We have to rebuild this, right? Not to actually revamp what we have only, or to fix what we have. We have to rebuild it because the concept is completely different. Different from how the government should act, what is the real true role of a government. And this is the problem. The public now is actually challenging governments for their roles on what they play every day. And this pressure on government is actually helping us with the digital transformation.
I mean, just amazing points. I mean, just to kind of summarize, you're really challenging us to innovate, making this call to change our mindsets fundamentally about how we're looking at how we share data and how we use data, changing frameworks. And this is such a great point that you're making, it's not just about data is there, but you also have people who are actually using it and how they view data. So, this is, really opening up so many new ideas for discussion. So with that, I want to turn to Jane. On one side, His Excellency talked about immense opportunities. I really like that he's pushing, he wants us to push the boundaries. But on the other side, we do have some challenges, especially for the private sector. You know, it's a challenge for regulators and companies to navigate the future of data governance. But even before legislation, industry played an important role in determining technical standards, codes of conduct, and market principles. So what are some of the regulatory challenges that the industry is grappling with today, and what can governments do to enhance the regulatory framework for data in a way that it supports innovation and value creation in the private sector? And Jane, if you can keep your comments brief, that would be great. Thank you.
And this is a topic for a PhD. So thank you for the question, and also the sort of understanding that this is not a one or another. There are trade-offs all the way, and I suppose I might sort of go straight to the finish and say, by working on this together and in consultation with industry, with the people who are impacted, with the agencies in this digital ecosystem, that is the best way forward. I think the decision makers across industry and government are wrestling with this disruption, the impact of digital technologies, what data they use, how they create it, what they share, what are the responsibilities of the different parties, and how do they actually lift that mindset. You know, it's not just technology that's a legacy, and sometimes we have legacy mindsets as well. And I think the last speaker really pulled out, you know, how critical that is. The important thing, and we are seeing more, as would be the World Bank and all, you know, many countries are now looking at the sort of the legal regulatory systems and how they actually adapt to this digital environment. It's important for governments to be really clear about what matters and what their objectives are, where the regulations play a role, such as in consumer protection. This is often addressed by personal data protection laws. We're seeing that. We're seeing the privacy laws that might have been established, say in Australia in 1988, are being changed and updated. There's a lot that is looking at in terms of data innovation, how there's a potential to use sandboxes to actually test this, so you don't have to wait 3 years for the results to come in on how to change that regulation. Many global South countries are already proposing data protection laws. Thailand, Mexico, Brazil, Uganda, and South Africa have passed these laws recently. Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh are currently proposing them. AWS is strongly supporting the creation of these data protection laws and requirements to be clear about how governments, these data frameworks can be used for certain regulatory sectors, as well as making life clear for all parties. Data protection, data use, sharing frameworks are all important, all fundamental to ensuring that individual citizens will use the technologies that will benefit them and actually use them in a way that creates a trusted environment and trust in big institutions that can be public and private sectors. I'll just say risk-based approach, use what already and insights that can be gained from around the world. Don't have to start afresh. There are a lot of global standards. Many of the private companies that work internationally comply with this and can prove how they're actually in play. And I guess the last thing, which is the
Sorry, Jane, I do have to interrupt. Can you? Yeah, thank you.
The regulatory frameworks have to deal with the cost that it might take for compliance versus the ability of businesses to innovate. So what those trade-offs are, and consultation and engagement at the front end rather than the back end is essential.
Thank you, Jane. I think you made that excellent point about trade-offs. Yeah, besides this whole thing being a separate PhD project, but also doing more consultations and being inclusive in how the policies are designed, you know, for it to actually really help with, you know, creating that ecosystem where, you know, you create a more thriving data economy. So Mark, I want to now move to you to, Our Excellency talked about, he touched upon very briefly about the asymmetries in data access and, availability of this data to different people. So in that sort of context, for all of this development potential that we talk about, the benefits of data are for now skewed towards the better off. So improved representation in and access to data for marginalized people is a priority. And digital connectivity is low in regions like sub-Saharan Africa, and availability of modern infrastructure for exchanging, storing, and processing data is negligible. So more broadly, lower income countries find themselves at a competitive disadvantage when it comes to creating data platform businesses. So what kind of reforms are needed to strengthen the data infrastructure to support innovations in data sharing and use?
Thanks, Mala. And I'll keep my response quick as we haven't got much time. So we can think of those inequalities at the national level and at the international level. And if you're going to get everyone involved and able to benefit from the data ecosystem that we've been talking about, you need to be able to address inequalities of both of those levels. So at the national level, clearly as public services and engagement in the economy and society more broadly shifts to digital, it becomes more important that everyone has access to digital. Whereas in the past, a broadband connection could be seen as a luxury in many low-income countries. As the world and the economy and public service delivery shifts to digital forms of mechanisms of delivery, having access to that becomes a necessity, no longer a luxury. So getting broadband access out across the entire country in an affordable and practically usable way is priority number one. Now then, if we think about the international level, these inequalities also exist between countries, as you mentioned. Actually, what we've been talking about in this session, when we talk about high capacity data infrastructure, storage, processing, transmission, and the skills ecosystem and business ecosystem that supports it, that is largely concentrated in rich countries and the very large developing countries, some of the ones that we've mentioned. So there's huge inequalities in that. And those countries that don't currently have access to it are going to find themselves increasingly disconnected from the world that we've been describing here. So the first thing that's needed is infrastructure investment at a large scale, and the policy and the entire suite of regulatory and financial and market reforms that are required in order to support that investment is have to take place at a fairly rapid pace if those countries can be able to catch up. And the final point is just one about the fundamental business model of the cloud and the world of cloud infrastructure and business services that we're talking about involves cross-border access to data. And therefore you need cross-border infrastructure, and you need critically the policy and regulatory environment that allows data to flow across those borders. Because without that, countries are not going to be able to benefit from the economies of scale that this brings. Mala, over to you.
Thank you so much. I think we've come to the end of the panel discussion. We've run out of time. We've had so many great ideas. I wanted to thank all of you. And I now want to invite our esteemed discussant for this session, Professor Kwong Roll Park, who's the Assistant Professor from the Graduate School of Science and Technology Policy, KAIST, to give his impressions from the discussions and maybe touch upon some of the things that, beyond the technical considerations that we talked about around regulations and technical infrastructure, but focus maybe more around some of the political economy considerations, that we need to, that are needed to enable successful data sharing. Please, over to you.
Thank you, Mala. Very important point of view. I think it's another topic for the PhD. So I think I need to be very efficient given this time limit. But first of all, thank you very much for inviting me in this great forum. I also greatly enjoyed the keynotes and also panel discussions today. So what I'd like to mention is nothing new, but I'd like to make a couple of points on how we can actually establish a strong data ecosystem and governance, maybe from the political economic perspective, and how we should contextualize data economy. First of all, establishing data ecosystem and governance is not an easy task. You know, there are many cross-cutting technical issues related to the data access, architecture, standard for coding schemes and API. You know, managing data lifecycle and you know, engaging stakeholders is very crucial. Right, the digital technologies provides lots of opportunities, and also data has the power to solve some of the most difficult challenges facing our uncertain society. But data-driven transformation is not just about infrastructure technology, but it's about social transformation and individuals' behavior or change. So second, it's about culture and it's about trust. Mala, you were also the part of the open data initiatives in the bank. When I worked for the bank, I was also involved in mapping for result project, which geocoded all bank finance projects using the open data for better transparency and coordination in the field of international development. It was a partial success, but one of the key lessons that I have for organizational change was that we need to promote a culture of sharing data and making data freely available across the whole organizations, and as well as the governments of a partner country in developing countries. So number three is leadership. It's important. So as our Excellency just mentioned, most of the data remain siloed and fragmented and unavailable for deriving socio-economic values. So it's essential to ensure sort of high-level political and organizational leadership of the agile policy change. So without this kind of such institutional settings and data champion leading policy framework in place, it would be impossible for implementing the full kind of functionalities of data ecosystem. So it's very important to have strong advocates of the values of data in positions of power. That's why I think that today's discussion is very timely and very useful. And also effective public-private partnership is also important. And lastly, education and data literacy is also important, not only for individuals' job market competition, but also for preparing for the future as a kind of digital citizen. So this kind of data-driven digital transformation actually raised a lot of fundamental philosophical questions in our society. So the right of people to access and amend their data should be considered as a primary component of the digital human rights. So I think these are the crucial issues. And also one of the critical policy issues in terms of sort of how we can actually provide some policy and empirical transferability from advanced countries to developing countries is definitely related to the cross-border data transfers as well. So we still have the uncertainty here to work together because in the absence of any kind of binding regional or international framework, especially cross-border enforcement of privacy laws and institutional settings for innovations in national data ecosystems, remains one of the most difficult challenges, which are particularly difficult for least developed countries and other developing countries with weak enforcement capacity. So I think there's a need to sort of reframe and broaden the international policy debate on cross-border collaboration to take into account the economic as well as non-economic dimensions of data-driven economy. So I think I know everybody would like to go for lunch in the venue, particularly in Korea. But let me conclude. I think today's discussion is very timely and useful for sort of co-producing for relevant national strategies for data economy. I think in order to ensure the full involvement of all relevant stakeholders, including academia and also research institute, private sector, and government in shaping the ways in which data economy is promoted, and also data flows are governed at the regional and national level. I think this collaboration and platform between the World Bank and Korean government and academia, including KAIST, will need to play a very crucial role. So I look forward to establishing effective links together between policy and firm strategies and academic research in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And I want to now close this segment with a big thank you to our speakers for this thought-provoking discussion and leaving us with many ideas for all of us to introspect and hopefully act on. Making these changes, everything that we covered in today's discussion, of course, is difficult and will depend on substantial commitment and effort. But the cost of failing to change is a world faced with greater inequities and many missed opportunities. Thank you all, and back to the session moderator.